This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we bring you our panel discussion entitled With Malice Towards One and All. The participants are Humra Quraishi, well-known writer and columnist, Ravi Singh, leading publisher, Preeti Gill, well-known festival manager and literary agent, and Renuka Narayan, columnist and writer who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Good evening and welcome to the National Programme of Talks. This time we'll be talking about Sardar Khushwant Singh, who was born in 1915 and passed away in 2014. To share our remembrances and discuss his very interesting and endearing personality, we have with us distinguished publisher Ravi Singh, well-known writer Humra Quraishi, and equally well-known festival manager and critic Preeti Gill. Welcome to you all, and may I begin by saying that I knew and liked Khushwant Singh very much myself. He was the one who got me into writing, to author The Life of Dancer Yamini Krishnamurti, and this was really way back in 1996. That led to a very long and happy association with Ravi Singh, who was my editor. And it also led to something that I cherish even today, which was my book of prayer, which was the first multi-faith book of prayer in the public domain after Gandhiji's Ashram Bhajnavali in 1922. And Khushwant Singh helped me with Punjabi Sufi verses and told me interesting things. Like when I selected a verse by Madhu Lal Hussain, he told me that they were actually a couple who were proscribed from the holy books because of their unusual relationship. But nevertheless, they wrote beautiful verse, and he was always so encouraging and friendly and delightful to be with. So I would like to begin by asking Ravi, who's known him, I think, the longest, about his memory of Khushwant Singh.
Well, my memory of Khushwant Singh is my memory of, things, of all the good things that have happened to me, in a sense. They all came together in his personality. He was the best kind of friend, guide, also a writer one was fortunate to work with, but also he represented the best of humanity and the best of India. There was great affection, but there was never any hypocrisy. His peeves also were very childlike, and his affection was pure also, childlike. And I remember once he said that, I forget the name of the person whom he was very close to, but at some point something happened and she spoke, angrily. And he still he said, it's been so many years, but says, I still regret that. So I said, then why didn't you make the effort to, make up? He said, well, I find it very difficult to forgive when someone has been rude to me. So I said, so therefore you're bitter. He said, no, I cannot be bitter. She was a beautiful person.
Lovely.
That was the kind of thing which informed his life and also his writing.
Humra, you've known him a long time too. Could you tell us your impressions of him?
Actually, I consider myself fortunate to have met him, and we bonded almost immediately. So much to him, now that we're talking and just thinking of all the things possible, he was a genuine person. He was more than a friend, loyal, genuine and caring. Something like a child in him. And one of the few people I felt comfortable with talking, interacting. He was a liberal man in the truest sense. He had read about every religion. He took out the positives. And he said two people he can't stand and one should keep away. One is corrupt people and one is commoner. He said because they ruin everything. So, and he made it a point. I've seen him having arguments with people on these two issues, and he would give it.
Let them have it.
There could be the who's who, he wouldn't care. And what Ravi just said, rudeness. And in fact, one thing which he told me, which I use in my so-called everyday life, is that if somebody hurts you or pains you or is being mean to you, don't waste time fighting it out or just run away from that person. Just keep away once for all, so that to love and respect your own self and the peace of mind. And the other thing that he kept harping on was not to waste time. Like he used to tell me, write on this, there's a hard will. He said, no, how are you so sure what's in store tomorrow? Health-wise, otherwise. He said people keep saying we'll write as if the whole sort of time is going to be there. He said no. And he used to keep looking at his watch. Now I realize, what it was. That time I didn't understand. Even 10 minutes wastage for him was wastage. People who were not punctual, he just kept away from them.
He was quite particular about punctuality.
That's correct.
He had the time for you, always.
Yes.
But there was a time when, he said, okay, fine.
It's my downtime.
Finish your drinks, whatever, and depart and go. His doors were always open, but for a certain period. So, in fact, it's almost a legend now that outside his house in Sujan Singh Park, the door, there was this sign which said, please do not ring the bell unless you are expected.
I remember that.
So it was the first time I remember when I went there and I didn't know him that well. And I said, oh, now what do I do? Because he'd said, aa jana shaam ko, but I hadn't really fixed an appointment. But then I rang the bell and he said, that's not for you, come. But he said, but don't come without an appointment. I may not fix the time, but I should know that you're expected. And then he would sleep early. He would get up at 4, listen to the Gurbani from the Golden Temple and the birds. He liked to get up before dawn and he would work. He had a very, very disciplined life for all his, thing of being a social person and loving people and loving to, interactions with people. And he was a great gossip, he said himself. But he was very disciplined.
No, that's interesting. Preeti, when you read his books, did you get a sense of this kind of person? Was Train to Pakistan the first book you read?
Yeah, I think it is definitely the book that had the most impact. Also because I think everybody, when they start thinking about partition or talking about partition, especially if you come from a family that has somebody who's been through that, then that is where you really start. And in that time when he wrote that, I don't think there was that much literature around partition. There probably was in languages other than English, but few translations. And so it's almost the first go-to book for reading about that. And also partition is the central theme, but it's done very differently. And it's very humanist in its approach. And it's talking about communities and relationships and people rather than this act that truncated and divided. So I think from that point of view also it is something that captures your imagination. And of course a love story at the center of anything is always something that grabs attention.
Particularly appeals to the South Asian heart.
Exactly. And if it's between communities, then there's something even more poignant about it. Because it is a place, South Asia, a place that has always been riven by these kinds of problems and traumas. So it is something that grips your imagination. And I remember that also because his writing is simple. It's not terribly difficult to read or the language or anything. It just grabs you right away. And everybody can read Khushwant Singh and enjoy Khushwant Singh because he doesn't pretend to be something terribly esoteric. He's talking about important things, but they're said very
delivered lightly.
Yeah. And so I think that is one of the main things. Even the more scholarly, if you want to call it that, works which he did on the history of the Sikhs, but it is again something which is easily readable.
No, and I think his journalism may have had a role to play in that, about communicating directly and simply to a large number of people. And he made such a huge success of the Illustrated Weekly. I remember as a kid in the 60s, it was very much part of our house, and we used to look forward to it. Of course, I was too small to read some of the bigger articles, but it was a very attractive product. And I believe readership plunged after he left. And of course, Hindustan Times, in which I was religion and arts editor. And he had such an enduring relationship with that newspaper, for the longest time his column would come out in it. And readers would love it and look forward to it. And he became a household name across South Asia, not just India. Because I've met people from Pakistan and Bangladesh who said they read him too. So he belonged in a very special way to the collective consciousness, if you'd like to call it that, of the English reading public. And of course, about his writing, particularly for other people, I remember an incident which was so embarrassing for me. I went to his house one afternoon on appointment, of course. I didn't dare ring the bell otherwise. And when I walked in, to my absolute horror, M.F. Hussain was sitting there. And Khushwant Singh was yelling at him for not keeping to some deadline or the other. I'm not sure. Maybe Khushwant Singh was supposed to write something about Hussain. And Hussain, being quite an elusive character, known to disappear on a whim. Maybe he hadn't shown up and that was what it was about. Those days we didn't have mobile phones, so I had nothing to look at. So I stared at my toes and waited for the storm to blow over. And after that, he was nice as pie. You know, life just picked up and went on. So that was an interesting little peep. I remember on his top shelf, because he spent some years in Paris with UNESCO, I think. He had a tiny marble statue of The Kiss by Auguste Rodin. He had all these little knickknacks from around the world dotted in his bookshelves, which are very charming to note. I mean, his room was a reflection of who he was. Loving to read, appreciating art. There were red roses, long-stemmed ones, in a big crystal vase on his sideboard. And I'd gone there once, I think it was with you, Ravi, one evening. And suddenly, on a whim, he just pulled out all those flowers, wrapped them up in newspaper and thrust them into my arms and said, "Come, take these home." Which was such a sweet, spontaneous thing to do. So these are some little sparkling memories one has. But I want to know, Ravi, from you, how you managed to relate the person to the writing. You've edited and published his books.
Yeah. Well, I think, the best thing about him is what Preeti also was saying, is to write about important things, dramatic things not only of great political, social import, but also, in a sense, timeless things, about love and about war and about violence and about compassion, and do it with such a light touch because he respected the reader. He wouldn't have he didn't like writers who kind of, deliberately
Showing
obtuse
off.
or difficult or showing off, and which is disrespect to the reader.
Right.
But equally, he also respected the reader enough to not dumb things down.
That's an important point,
Yeah,
especially in today's world of short attention spans.
Yeah, I know when people now say that, we write simply for the masses and therefore we write simply. So what that means is that basically we're giving them an inferior product.
Right.
He never did that. Train to Pakistan, of course, is this great
Delhi.
novel. But so I was coming to Delhi, which to me is one of the best novels from South Asia. It's one of the best also in the world. Because, it just accommodates so much history of over 1,000 years.
I agree with
Really,
It's richly
remarkable
textured.
characters. Absolutely.
And it's a very lively narrative, and the characters in it are so real.
Yeah.
Bhagmati especially.
Well, Bhagmati, the Hijra character, is the voice which makes it.
Yeah.
But there are also, there are emperors, there are sultans, there are diplomats, there is Bhagmati, there's Budh Singh, the slightly, odd Sikh character in it. And then there is, I forget the name of the person who rescued Guru Tegh Bahadur's body.
I know whom you're talking
corpse,
about.
yeah.
I've forgotten his name too. Jatta, it was something
I think
Jatta.
so. Yeah, so he and a Dalit also.
Yes.
It's just, the thing is, he just knew so much. He was so
Yes.
intimately connected not only with Indian history and society, but also world. But you were saying there's Rodin. In his room, the curtains, there were couplets in Urdu. There were lines in Arabic. And the Bible, which he thought was the most beautiful book of literature, the best poetry.
It is the KJV, the King James version.
And he
Very
would,
beautiful.
he would, recite from memory, Urdu, Shari. He would recite. Mir was his favorite rather than Ghalib. So, I mean, I'm just saying, so as a writer, it was because he was an encyclopedia of human experience, of knowledge also, but it was just done so lightly and with great respect for the reader, without dumbing things down, but also without trying to impress them. These are people who are born like once
In a
century.
long while.
A long.
Did you have a favorite among his books, Humra?
I used to read his columns because one could actually know what's happening. And books, I've read all of them, but there's nothing, because they're all different,
Okay. So you can't particularly single one out.
Co-authored in the sense that he spoke, I wrote Absolute Khushwant. Then his profiles, which Ravi commissioned of different people. And one of the persons I know asked him very frankly that, I'm writing and nothing is moving. So he said, first of all, don't use big words. Because you cannot fool the reader.
Yeah.
That's no good writing. Just write what's
Truthful
coming.
and simple.
And yet a lot of facts, actually. And, something about him that he cared for those in jail. They were in constant touch with him, some of them.
I see.
And the thing is that he said the writer's job is to connect people, not to destroy connections. And that's a very big thing.
It's a very beautiful thing to say.
Communities, people, and there was this thing outside his main door, but he said that if somebody is in distress, can actually come and tell my staff, and they would. And he was very good to his staff. I must say. I mean, they were there, I think, for years and decades, and that speaks a lot about him. And the other thing is that he was misunderstood, because a lot of people used to say, you can tell Khushwant, but suppose he writes about it. He was so loyal that some of the people I know used to go to his home from 11 to 12 to discuss their personal problems. He wouldn't call them in the evening, because then there'll be more people. So I asked him, I said, how come so-and-so was here at 11:30 when we were doing this book together, Absolute Khushwant, which again Ravi commissioned? He said, no, because she had a lot of personal problems to discuss. I didn't want a third person to hear.
No, that was very thoughtful of him.
I mean, he was a very, very gracious man, in the sense that there was these big qualities, but nobody actually bothered to know all. And he himself didn't give the impression that he's helping out so many people.
Yeah.
Balwant Gargi once told me that I would have been on
He was
the
a
road.
theatre personality of Punjabi theatre.
But he said
he's
he's going through such financial lows, Balwant Gargi that is, and he said that Sardarji gives me money to pay all my bills without even Sardarni knowing about it.
Talking of Sardarni, I have a very sweet memory.
That is his
lovely
level.
story. Lovely story. Talking of Sardarni, I remember his wife.
His wife, obviously.
Kamal.
Kamal.
So I used to be walking in Lodi Gardens. This very lazy 17-year-old dragging her feet, and she was marching briskly by, and she tapped me on the shoulder and said, walk properly.
Oh God. Who? Kamal?
Kamal. I said, yes, Ma'am, in this quavering voice, and I obeyed. When she passed away, my then editor, Shekhar Gupta, asked me, in fact, to write a little piece about her, which I did. But it was very nice how she let him hold court, and he had this whole life connected with a wide swathe of society. I mean, she was so supportive, is what I'm trying to say.
Yet
she
kept
kept aside.
And the way he looked after her when she was down with Alzheimer's, very few people would do that. He'd be sitting on the same sofa chair writing, and she would be on the opposite end with the nurse. So I said, no, why? He said, no, I want to
keep an eye on her.
Yes. And the nurse was a Muslim, and she used to keep all the fasts, the nurse. So today's the first day of Ramzan, so I thought, let me get this. He used to get up at 3:34, Khushwant, give her the sehri. He said, I give. Evenings, he used to look at the watch, that this is time, and he used to tell Chandan, khana lagaiye inke. I mean, there was the caring thing about everything.
Details.
With values. Core values with him were there. So as a writer, you can't just see the writer as a writer alone, but without that personality or the goodness, no writing can be complete. True. I feel that.
No, absolutely. And did you sense all this while reading Delhi or History of the Sikhs, Preeti?
I don't know about sensing it when you're reading, but definitely I think Khushwant Singh was a larger-than-life person, because there's no way that you've not read about him, not just about his writing, or you've not watched interviews, or you've not actually, even if you haven't interacted with him, and I think I've been to possibly 1 or 2 book launches where he was there, but that's it. I don't really have any personal interaction or anecdotes like that. But then you've heard so much and you've read so much about the person. And then there are lots of interesting things that, at least like Humra is saying, I would find of extreme value in a person, because whether they are a great writer or not, these are things that make a great person. And because you find them so rarely, I
one cherishes them even more.
Much more. And among them is the fact of being honest to a fault. If he didn't like something, or if he didn't like even a job, I don't know how many times he resigned from various jobs, including, having been a lawyer and whatever. But if this is something that does not give you joy, then he was not sticking with it. And maybe the thing of being able to tell lies also didn't go down well with him. And so, I mean, to have somebody of that kind of caliber, I think that is rare to find. The fact that you're a Sikh, you write a history of the Sikhs, but there's nothing that blinds you. I mean,
and he used to say he was an atheist.
Yeah. He was atheist or agnostic, whatever, but he was definitely a questioner. It was not like you were believing in everything that was being told to you. Yes. And that comes across, I mean, whether it's thinking of the Bible as a beautiful piece of literature. And I know my dad used to say much the same thing. So it's little things like that connect you. Despite not having known the person, but these are ideas.
They live through their writings, and that's why it's important.
Ideas, the ideas that you have put out in the world, and the ideas that you think are important, because those are the ideas that I think are slowly dying. And the fact, like what Ravi said earlier about actually being above even religion, to be able to think that people were the same at the end of the day.
What he did say was, and you saw that with him, he was an atheist, but he was deeply interested in all religions. But he said, if I have a religion, then it is probably nature.
He wrote a beautiful book on the trees of Delhi.
No, it was the Seasons in Delhi.
Yeah, Sattva Basu illustrated them, if I remember.
Beautiful book on Delhi, and in his columns he wrote a lot about, and it wasn't like huge, large forests, etc. The tree outside his window, the birds that come and go, the cats, stray cats, some of whom, came into his house and all, and they also had adopted a dog at one point. But there's one thing I wanted to say was about, the childlike quality, the warmth, etc., etc. And an extension of that, which was also very endearing, was his sense of mischief. He was, and he told the bawdiest of jokes. And there was this image, which he rather enjoyed, of this crusty old man and who will shock say anything to shock the world, and a lecherous old man, etc. But he was actually, and also that rude, acerbic, but he was actually, as we've said, very affectionate. And he led a very disciplined life, which was also boring. I remember a writer saying that, for all this thing about him being a lecherous old man, this is an image he enjoys and cultivates. It's unlikely that he's ever slept with anything more exciting than a hot water bottle.
Quite right. And he was actually quite straightforward and square almost, old-fashioned and proprietary.
Old-fashioned.
Totally.
And he cherished good manners, like both of you testify. He said, just get away from rude people.
Yeah.
And he liked it when you stood up or sat down properly, when you greeted people properly, when you said please and thank you. These may seem like very simple things, but these are the gestures that lubricate the wheels of society. And he was very particular about that, as I think that generation was. I think all our fathers were equally, quote-unquote, stuffy about good manners. And
but
there was something wonderful about him that I liked.
But
he was a pillar.
There is all of this, but there was no humbug in his life. So these things were all right. But
he was
also
genuine.
Completely genuine. Exactly. And he was, this also came out of a respect for people.
Yes.
He absolutely hated bigotry and hate. Yes. He could not stand that. So, in fact, he was among the first people to speak out against Sikh militancy. And, of course, he was on their hit list for a long time. So he was fearless, and he did not believe in violence, but he was very brave. He was fearless. I remember once when, I'd said, will you sign up? I don't normally ask people to sign, but, he really was a very special person. So I said, will you sign the copies of your books? So he said, I think it was sometime late September. He said, Agle hafte aana, 2 तारीख को Gandhi Jayanti hai. He's my hero. Us din main tumhari sign karunga. When he signed, he said with affection, on Gandhi Jayanti this year.
How delightful. Such a charming thing to do.
He said only 2 people, sorry.
No, I was just saying, when you brought up the Sikhs, but also the returning of the the Padma at that time in 84. So it was that he was against Bhindranwale, he was on the hit list, he stood against terrorism and violence, and he said it very openly all the time. And yet, when this happened, this whole storming of the Golden Temple and all of that.
Yeah.
But I'm glad he reconnected with the Padma Vibhushan in later years. That was a nice thing to do.
That he did, but also, he was, he did not want to disrespect.
Yes, the Indian gift.
The Indian gift, but, if this was done, he had to make a statement and he returned.
Exactly.
One day I asked him, whom do you respect in today's India? He said, recent history of India. He said, only 2 people. He said, I've seen everybody, I met hundreds, thousands. One was Mahatma Gandhi, one was Mother Teresa.
Really?
And he has some amazing things to tell about Mother Teresa and missionaries of charity.
I see.
He stayed there, he was there.
In Calcutta.
And he said, only 2 people, nobody.
I see.
And that's the reason why people, again, that's part of his not wanting anybody's favor. Of course, he liked it. He said, important people come, look who came and gave me flowers. But he really didn't care for them.
Yeah.
He didn't.
There was an inner detachment, I think, or
above all this.
Yes, a transcendental sort of state of mind, from where he was able to see the good points of all the religions.
He could write fearlessly.
No, but also the fact that if he came from the family that he came from, because it was a very privileged upbringing and a very privileged, rich family that he came from. He had houses everywhere. His father was giving him, Lahore mein, there was a house there's a house in Kasauli, there's a house in XYZ, then, shifting houses in Delhi. Again, one more palatial.
Basically, he used to talk about his village home.
No, I agree.
Adali.
No, but he did come,
The thing is that you come from that and you do not, you're not sort of swollen up or arrogant because of where you come from. Because I was seeing something where he also made this statement that people will think I'm a nikattu because I don't have a job and I've not made any money and I am actually living off my father's money. So for somebody who comes from that privilege to even think like that, I think that is quite remarkable.
It is
So how
indeed.
simply he lived, Humra. In all the time that we met him, did you ever see him in anything outside of those khaddar ka, not khaddar, yeah, almost khaddar ka kurta pajama,
kurta pajamas,
Cotton, huh?
his legs stretched out on a moda.
Khana bhi, there were two things, only dal and one sabzi, jobi, and rice.
Yeah.
Kabhi meat
No,
dish,
it was
but
an
no.
extraordinarily frugal life in some ways, and the decor also. Now, I have a theory about this. I call it the Teen Murti template, where if you see the living quarters of Pandit Nehru and Mrs. Gandhi, they're very touching. They're so simple and yet so elegant, and they also reflect the mood of India in those first few decades, where you were proud of who you were, but you kept it simple and clean.
Traditional.
And all our homes, a lot of our homes follow the Teen Murti template, and I think his did too, where you didn't show off, you didn't have blingy objects and expensive vases and busts and statues and urns overflowing with things. It was a very functional house. And in fact, I found echoes in the way, say, our houses were. There was a extraordinary minimalism, and yet it was so rich because it was filled with books, with great thoughts, with small but beautiful art objects. So the things in it were very nice.
And he kept to his that yellow writing pad and pen. And I think 2-3 people gave him mobiles and all. He said, "Ye meri bas ki baat nahi hai."
He wouldn't get into
The
modern
typist,
technology.
the typing, and that old traditional way.
His typist was with him for what, 40 years?
40 years.
He was a different man.
Yeah.
And the things that excited him? Traveling. And what did he travel for? Some bird he wants to see. He wants to be by the sea. He wants to see the monsoon in Bombay. He would go to Haridwar just for the Aarti. Just to go there to
that
see
he
the
told me
Aarti,
to
which
see
he
that.
said was one of the most beautiful
It
sights
is.
in
He
the
told me
world.
one of
You should,
India's
you
lovely
should go and see.
experiences.
He would go there and he would live in simple, dharamshala kind of places.
Yeah. No, that was the thing, to be connected to the whole world, be connected to different parts of your own amazing country, and to reach out and be reached out to.
No, and one thing I would like to talk, just a little mention in fact. I said, then how do you get de-stressed? He said, I do think of death quite a bit, and I go and sit near
In the cremation grounds.
ground, so that this is end result.
He can contemplate.
Death is death.
Yeah, death is death.
And writing a full book of obituaries about it.
Yeah, and even the thing that the door, death at my doorstep.
Including his own.
Including his own.
So you
I
go-
think we've covered quite an interesting life thanks to your wonderful reminiscences and opinions. And I would like to thank you all for sharing your thoughts and impressions of Sardar Khushwant Singh, and say good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to the panel discussion entitled With Malice Towards One and All. The participants were Humra Quraishi, well-known writer and columnist; Ravi Singh, leading publisher; Preeti Gill, well-known festival manager and literary agent; and Renuka Narayan, columnist and writer, who initiated and moderated the discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.